to present to you this section of our Oliver Reginald Tambo Leadership series, which is entitled OR The Constitutionalist. And we are joined by, I think, and I say this without any hesitation, perhaps the best person to speak on this issue, the incomparable Justice Albie Sachs. And two of his favorite things to talk about are Oliver Tambo and the Constitution. So this conversation is tailor-made for him. Judge Albie, just to begin, would you perhaps give us a recollection of your first encounter with Oliver Tambo and the sense you got from meeting him?
Yes, well, let me not go straight to that, but to a very wonderful thing that was said to me. 1989, it's a year after the bomb in Maputo. I'm blown up. I lose my right arm, sight in one eye, and I'm a little bit disfigured. And I traveled to the United States. I'm teaching at Columbia University, and I'm invited to go up to Canada. And to cut a long story medium, the ANC representative in Canada looks at me and he said, "You know something, Comrade Albie, the Boers have Africanized you. They've given you scars like Oliver Tambo."
Wow, yeah.
And I felt fantastic to have scars like he had his travel scars. Now the scars that I had, they've more or less disappeared now, made me like Oliver Tambo. And I felt such a sense of joy at being likened to this person, and partly because we couldn't have been more different in terms of background, culture, some ways, even our existential space was so different. And I sometimes ask the question, what's the one good thing that apartheid did? The audiences start getting very, very nervous. And I say, relax. They created anti-apartheid. If it hadn't been for apartheid, I would never have met Oliver Tambo. He grew up in the Transkei, a poor rural family, deeply religious, imbued with African culture. I grew up in Cape Town, by the sea, not on the land, at the beach, very cosmopolitan setting, very internationalist, and I'm deeply secular. So what brought us together? And it's his whole experience of being an African person, suffering the oppression that was meted out automatically, all the time, all over the country, to people like him. And I grew up in an internationalist, socialist family, anti-racist. My father, General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union, that had workers all different backgrounds. And my mother, Ray, the typist for Moses Kutani, the General Secretary of the Communist Party. So, totally different background, but I then have, as fate and the struggle would take me, the great joy and privilege of meeting Oliver. The very first time I actually saw him was in 1953, and I was a second-year law student at that stage at the University of Cape Town. And when I went to Johannesburg, I just joined the struggle. And I enrolled to be in the Defiance of Unjust Rules campaign. And the date is postponed till after my December election, my December exams. And a group of whites in Cape Town are going to voluntarily sit down on seats marked non-whites only. So now I'm imbued with the spirit of struggle, freedom struggle. I'm involved, I'm committed. And when I go to Joburg, I visit the firm of Mandela and Tambo, the only Black African legal firm in South Africa. Maybe the first one ever, but certainly the only one functioning at that time. And I go there just to pay my respects. And I remember coming to the office, very, very crowded, a very sort of modest sort of building, very close to the magistrate's court. And it's jam-packed with people and poor people, not like wealthy clients with their cars parked outside. People who come bicycle, they walk, they come in buses. We didn't have the taxis in those days that brought the poor in town. And I just say that I'm from a bad town, and I've just come to pay my respects to the comrade leaders of the ANC. And it would be Ruth Mompati, who was the person who conceived me. She was my office manager. And looking back now, in a way, it's a bit of a cheat on my part. They're busy people. Why should they take time off to greet? But they took time off. It would be just a moment to come, either Nelson Mandela or Oliver Tambo, and greet me with such courtesy and such warmth. Mandela, taller, bigger, radiant smile. Tambo a little bit shorter, but also a wonderful, wonderful smile. And to some extent, those early memories are merged the two. So it's Mandela Tambo become almost like, I can't say exactly who was the first one to meet me, and the next year I would come up again. But with that same warmth, that same sort of embrace. And I'd be given a cup of tea, and they would explain how the struggle is doing in Cape Town, University of Cape Town. And we always try to give an upbeat report on the struggle. But it wasn't like a serious report. And Comrade Albie, thank you so much for dropping in. We appreciate it very much. And as you can see, we're very, very, very busy. So I wish we could spend more time. But thank you for coming. So that first physical contact was one of, if you like, on their home ground, giving me a beautiful embrace. The embrace, I don't know if it was actually a physical hug, but it was the embrace of welcome to the struggle. If you want to join us, it's our struggle, and our struggle is wide enough, expansive enough to include all people who support its aims and objectives, share in what we do.
And you mentioned, that the first encounter you had with him was at the firm that he and Mandela founded. What do you think inspired him to enter the legal profession? Because you spoke a lot about his background. And why did him and Mandela, why were they open to being lawyers for a legal system that was so racist and that imposed oppression?
Okay, they didn't join the legal profession to become lawyers, to make money and have a professional career and advance. They joined the legal profession because Walter Sisulu, who had recruited them into the youth league and spotted their talent and sharpness and capacity to use language and argue forcefully, said, we're going to need lawyers in the struggle. And he encouraged them. So Tambo, I think, Mandela had a job, I think, on the mind, but he quickly went into law. Tambo had become a teacher, and he was teaching maths and science at St. Peter's School, the school that had been set up by Father Huddleston. So it was an assignment, if you like, in contemporary language a few years ago. One would have said he was deployed by Professor Sulu to study law.
What we are asking the world to do is not to solve our problems for us, but to assist us solve those problems. We have tried to ask that that assistance should be given in such a way that we can solve the problems peacefully. That has not been forthcoming. And we are continuing to try and solve the problems with the methods that are available to us. And the stage that has been reached is that the methods that are available to us now are those which we have tried to resist over a long period of time. They are the methods of violence. Because the worst of all horrors in the world is to live forever as a slave, as a hated, despised, subhuman. And this we reject.
Translating that humanity to being the commander-in-chief of an armed struggle is something that is, of course, difficult. Was there any resistance that he experienced within the organization towards his humanity, his compassion? Was it ever tense, moments of tension in him being the commander-in-chief and being so humane?
No, the problem he had earlier on was in relation to Albert Luthuli, whom he loved, and whom we worked with very, very closely. And he was a protege of Luthuli. They worked very, very closely together. And Luthuli was committed to nonviolence, philosophically. But Luthuli accepted that the organization mustn't be dominated by his particular views. And Luthuli then didn't call for armed struggle, being against his philosophy, but he didn't oppose the armed struggle. Moses Kotane of the Communist Party also had hesitation about the armed struggle. Not in principle, he favored, if you like, an insurrection, but of workers, not focusing on the military type struggle. So here was the communist Moses Kotane, an elder then, and the pacifist clergyman, traditional leader, Albert Luthuli, being opposed to it, but not resisting it, going along with it. When it came to the comrades inside the armed struggle, they had enormous respect and admiration for him because he was so caring and concerned. And he actually went to the river with them as they were being secretly taken over the river. He went right down the riverbank. It's quite a steep bank. It's quite physically dangerous and difficult to see them off. He always felt that he's not like the commander-in-chief far away sending troops to fight some kind of war in some distant place. He was like the father to all of them. When Mandela met with Luthuli in London, not with Luthuli, met with Tambo in London to explain the going over to armed struggle, Oliver asked Madiba, you tell Adelaide. I can't tell Adelaide. I want you to tell Adelaide. And it was Mandela who actually told Adelaide, and she accepted it. So they were, in that sense, pacifists at heart. I'm a pacifist at heart, but I supported the armed struggle. I never joined MK. The armed struggle came to me and blew me up. But I accepted the need for violence against state oppression that had no scope for alternative means. When it came to the question of the treatment of captured enemy agents, now this is maybe my most important encounter with Oliver Tambo until now. Until now, I've just a comrade seeing him up on a platform, listening to what he's saying, hearing stories about the marvelous role that he played at Morogoro, bringing the organization together, offering to resign. He said, I failed. Young people, Tasani and the others, MK people, felt they were being abused and ill-treated in the army, and I should have been looking after them and ensuring these things didn't happen. I resigned, and he was persuaded not to resign, to carry on. So he became legendary for his capacity to reach out to everybody in the organization. But now I'm working in the future. I still had two arms then. I'm in the Ministry of Justice. I get a phone call. This would have been around about 1983, and the people in the office department were just very excited. The Tambo's on the line, giving me Portuguese. And he says, hello, good afternoon, what are you doing? African style. And why is he phoning? Why is he patient quite? What's the story? What's my health like? How things I speak. And eventually he said, some issues have arisen and we feel that you might be able to help. Could you come to the SARCA? Now, normally the ANC people would say, Comrade Albie, it's a conference in Greenland next Tuesday. You must be there with a 30-page paper. Here the president is saying, can I make it? If you can't, I fully understand. If it will help, I can speak to Samora Michelle. And I said, no, I don't think it would be necessary to speak to Samora Michelle. I'll speak to the Minister of Justice. And a week later, I'm in the Lusaka. And I'm driven down to his office. You came there, it was an office in a backyard, entered by a sanitary lane, a very small building. And now I'm meeting the president of the ANC, and I'm very excited. And I noticed he had a rolled up piece of paper swatting flies. And I somehow felt the leader of the National Liberation Struggle, commanding chief in Court of Receiver, shouldn't be swatting flies. But then who else should have been swatting the flies? It just struck me that it's a little bit incongruous. And then he asked after my health, political situation, etc. And eventually he says to me, Comrade Albie, we have a problem. We captured a number of enemy agents. And there's nothing in the ANC constitution about what to do with captured enemy agents. As part of the constitution, we don't have a clause that says what to do with captured enemy agents. So, my confident lawyer's way, I said, well, the clear international rules and principles saying no cruel, inhuman, degrading punishment or treatment, no torture. And he says to me, you use torture. At that stage, I didn't know he'd set up the Stewart Commission to go to the camps in Angola where captured agents were being beaten up. These were not dissidents, these were enemy agents sent to blow us up, to kill us, mess with the ammunition and so on, how to deal with them. In any event, he instructs me then, requests me to draft a code of conduct to deal not only with captured enemy agents, to have a proper trial, appropriate punishment, right to defense, evidence being there, but what to do with comrades who stab, going for sexual assaults and abuse, who steal money from the organization, who drive when they're drunk. And the local states in which we were at our camps said, we don't want to deal with your problems in our courts. You deal with them. We've got enough problems. So the code of conduct had to deal with that. And then the comrades would speak out of turn, come drunk to a meeting. And I created a 3-tiered system of tribunals, ANC tribunals, not tribunals. In your branch, that person who comes and doesn't respect the chair and is abusive and so on, you don't need a trial. You deal with that politically at the branch. But for sexual assault, for stealing, violations of the norms of central organization, we set up regional tribunals, and then for grave offenses against the organization, like trying to destroy it from within, to assassinate the leaders, and so on, a very special tribunal. And Oliver Tambo was behind that. And it was important. He didn't say, you can't on the truth without making ends, or all fair in love and war, or the end justifies the means. He never believed the end justifies. The means must always be related to the end, but in a proportionate way, and a rule with ethically governed way. And the abuses in the camp stopped. I wouldn't say 100%, probably 90%. It's the change of leadership. The ANC set up internal courts. Ted Botani from the Constitutional Committee was one of the judges, and other comrades, George Jobatwana, one of the judges. General Maduna acted as defense counsel, and he actually got one of the accused persons off, and security were furious with him afterwards, getting his reactions off. But this was legality inside the ANC in a revolutionary struggle. I don't think there's been an equivalent. Certainly, none of the other Southern African revolutions had anything. But it meant we were thinking about legality and think about humanity all the way through. And that turned out to be stronger and more powerful than the violence and the brutality of the South African security forces and their lack of principle whatsoever. In the end, the cohesion, the comradeship, the value-driven revolutionary spirit triumphed over the brute force of the regime.
And that's wonderful and extraordinary. And I think you're quite right about how exceptional that legality is in the context of a liberation movement.
Our armed actions were always directed at mass mobilization. Always with our armed actions, we're communicating with our people and saying they must fight on two fronts and combine two sectors of struggle, armed struggle and political action. These two complemented and supplemented each other.
If I may ask you, where do you think that deep humanity came from? What was it? Something in his upbringing? Was it something he had learned over time? Where did that come from?
I'm sure it was part of his upbringing. We use the word Ubuntu a lot now. That wasn't used then, but it's something deep in African philosophy. In his own case, he was a very committed Anglican, and in fact, in 1956, December 1956 was going to be a very important month for him. He was going to be ordained as an Anglican minister, and he was going to marry Adelaide. And on December the 6th, 1956, he was arrested for treason. Gilbert Mandela, Albert Pretoria, and others, thrown into prison, the Old Court prison where the Constitutional Court is today. He set up a choir immediately. They were released on bail, and he married Adelaide, but he never became an Anglican minister. But the same, if you like, vision of the world that drove him to the priesthood, now he carried with him into the revolutionary struggle. He wasn't a different person, and he carried it with him all the time. And in my case, I emphasize that because I come from a very secular background. And yet, he and I, we had a bond and a friendship that was quite exceptional. And when years later, many years later, jumping, he met me. I was then in Maputo, and he said almost diffidently, he'd been invited to a conference in London, World Conference on Religion, and almost like apologizing from leaving the front line to go to London to meet with religious leaders. I didn't need persuading, a very important constituency, very important to him. And he said, could I help him write his speech? Now, the ANC had a religious desk, and they would have had people saying, we know this Catholic, this Methodist, Church of England, and so on. They would have seen it in very pragmatic, practical terms. It came to me for something of what he might have called the Holy Spirit, secular Albie. That we could meet at that level of intense conscience and belief at the core of everything we were responsible for. And for me, it was a great honor to help him prepare the speech for the World Conference on Religion.
A very interesting idea that you put forward. I think it's your second lecture actually at the University of Western Cape, and it's in Oliver Tambo's Dream. And you talk about the Constitution as a framework for the struggle. That already in this idea of constitutionalism, that this document would articulate the struggle of our people. And you say that Oliver Tambo was the driving force behind setting that framework up.
Yes, I use the phrase, the Constitution, which we have now, as the framework for the current struggles. The Constitution provides the framework, the instruments, the mechanisms, through the vote, through free speech, the right to organize, the right to protest, the right to form trade unions, the right to set up civil society organizations. So at that stage, we had the ANC Constitution. And Tambo was a very strong constitutionalist. He had drafted the 1958 Constitution of the ANC. It was now being updated for the Kabwe Conference, which was held in 1985. So 1984, I'm in Lusaka, and I'm working with him on updating the ANC Constitution. And I'm kind of talking a little bit about the need for updating. The 58 Constitution had very important position with the Chaplain General. Now in 83, we had a commissar, so in a rather jaunt, cocky way, I'm saying, Then we had a Chaplain General, now we have a commissar. And he very quietly said, there's some people who feel we could do with a Chaplain General. Some people, of course, being him. And it's like a little shock for me. But he said it very quietly. And he told me, he reminded me that he had drafted that Constitution, but not belittling, but saying that was a Constitution in South Africa where you could campaign openly. Now we need a Constitution for people in revolutionary struggle. Very particular about getting the words correct, and a very strong emphasis on the value system. And a lot of the themes that are used now in internal debates inside the ANC about values were included very, very expressly in the draft of the Constitution and its statutes adopted at the Kabwe Conference in 1995. And Tambo was very, very keen on that. If I can just carry the Kabwe story a little bit forward.
Yes.
There are about 230 of us, some from MK, many from the Lusaka headquarters, the different departments, some on missions. We had more ANC missions in the world than the South African regime had diplomatic representations. Many of them studying in different parts of the world, all now about several hundred people meeting in Kabwe to carry the struggle forward. The decade of the 80s being declared the decade of liberation. So this is really the conference to plan for liberation. And what emerged from it were the 4 pillars of struggle, very, very specific. That meant include the armed struggle, the popular mobilization, the underground network, and international pressure. But Oliver Tambo also got a mandate for negotiation. But he declared after Kabwe, we must make South Africa ungovernable, apartheid unworkable. At the same time, set up the Constitutional Committee of the ANC. And he instructed Carlo Jordan, who was head of the research department of the ANC, one of the great, great intellectuals that I studied. to look at future constitutions for South Africa. Now, this is not generally known, but Paro's paper is the foundation of the 1996 South African Constitution.
Wow.
I'm saying that the paper that he wrote for Oliver Tambo, and Paro was pointing out, he said, the international pressures are enormous. There's going to have to be one person, one vote in South Africa. It's irresistible. The pressures are too great. So counter-revolution is planning for that and digging in their trenches. And they're going to say, if you have black majority rule, then you have to have protection for the white minority. And they would get the support of the West and lots of people in the world with their views of Afro-pessimism and so on. And he said, they're going to say, if you have one person, one vote, the blacks are in the majority, the whites have no incentive to lay down their guns to hand over power. And we will look unreasonable if we say, put down your guns, hand over power, you'd have the vote like everybody else, you'd have a democracy like we had in South Africa with parliament. And he said, our answer to what is called white fears is a Bill of Rights. And he said, in 1923, the ANC adopted the Bill of Rights. In 1944, during World War II, when Churchill and Roosevelt got together to draft accept the Atlantic Charter, the ANC said, we want a charter for black people in South Africa. And came up with a document called African Claims. And included in African Claims was a Bill of Rights. 1955, the Freedom Charter is like a Bill of Rights. So this is deep in ANC history, African history. It's not something that our intelligentsia have come up with as a counter to the idea that if black people become the majority in the country, white people will lose all their rights, they'll be driven into the sea, and so on. So the Bill of Rights then became central to the ANC strategy because Oliver Tambo saw this as the answer. And the whole battle over the Constitution from 1985 onwards was the ANC approach, majority rule, united South Africa, equal rights for all, and protections through a Bill of Rights, not protecting the white because they're white or minority, but because they're human beings, entitled to protection like everybody else. That's on the one side. And on the other side, what we call group rights and power sharing. And group rights would have meant group rights for ethnic, racial groups. And the idea eventually boiled down to 3 presidents sharing power. I didn't think of him specifically. I didn't have to think of him. He was part of me. And there was part of me that was part of him, if you like, that came from a similar source. He might say it was providence. I would say culture, history, or whatever. And it didn't matter. It was there. And it's the Tambo spirit, the Tambo style. He was a great listener. He was very, very collegial. He would listen to everybody, bring everybody into the discussion. He would say something respectful about each person who contributed. Even the more he disagreed with you, the more he would find to say something positive that he found what you had to say. And maybe a similarity I had with him is correcting my judgments. Go over and over and over and over again to get it just right, to get the language just right. But it was his values, his spirit, what was definitely with me all the time. In a way, say almost more than Mandela, because it was at a level of deep thought.
Of South Africa.
And if I may ask you, Judge Albie, just moving forward on the timeline to 1994, post the election, and you find yourself sitting on the first bench of a constitutional court. I wonder if there were any moments in your time as a justice where you thought of OR when dealing with cases of the Bill of Rights and how they affected human beings.
I didn't think of him specifically. I didn't have to think of him. He was part of me. And there was part of me that was part of him, if you like, that came from a similar source. He might say it was providence, I would say culture, history, or whatever. And it didn't matter. It was there. And it's the Tambo spirit, the Tambo style. He was a great listener. He was very, very collegial. He would listen to everybody, bring everybody into the discussion. He would say something respectful about each person who contributed. Even the more he disagreed with you, the more he would find to say something positive that he found what you had to say. And maybe a similarity I had with him is correcting my judgments. I'd go over and over and over and over again to get it just right, to get the language just right. But it was his values, his spirit, what was definitely with me all the time. In a way, say almost more than Mandela, because it was at a level of deep thought.
And to now speak on the content of the Constitution, and in Oliver Tambo's Dream, you speak in the written form of the lectures beautifully about how many of the principles from the Bill of Rights that you instructed to write with Kada Ashmal and others came into the final text of the Constitution. Something that comes to mind immediately is that our Constitution is non-sexist. And I wonder, was OR a feminist? Was he a feminist in his style of leadership and running the organization?
I've often thought about that. And my answer is, he wasn't a feminist, he was a Democrat. And the women in the organization, in 1979, 1980, many came to him and said, from a president, we feel diminished inside the ANC. We're given tasks which we're very happy to do, but we're not listened to, speak politics, and we feel unhappy in it. And he was very distressed by that. And he said, I'm glad you've come to me, but partly it's up to you now. You must be organized. You mustn't just come to speak to the president or the president to make these corrections. You must be organized and mobilized. And in that sense, he conducted himself as a feminist. He didn't come to feminism through a developed theory of patriarchy, division of labor, and things of that kind. He had a very dignified relationship with Adelaide, who was a nurse, very active, who spoke out publicly, politically. They met through politics. She wasn't a subordinate wife by any means. But it wasn't through being convinced at a theoretical level that, he suffering as most or almost all of us men did and maybe still do to some extent through unconscious male chauvinistic attitudes. So it wasn't done at that psychological level. It was done at the level, he's the leader of the organization, and he conceived that wonderful, wonderful comrades willing to give their lives for the struggle are not feeling comfortable in the organization because of patriarchal values. And he encouraged them to become organized. He gave a lot of space to Jenny Franwella, who was a very confirmed active feminist. He respected her enormously and enabled her to set up the Commission for the Emancipation of Women inside the ANC in Lusaka. He never accepted the line of men and women, we fight together as equals in the same organization, there aren't problems, and we mustn't divide the organization by raising the question. He never, on the contrary, said raise this. And in that sense, he gave enormous support. Ruth Mompati, who was his office manager, was somebody, again, she didn't, if you like, walk and talk feminism in the very proactive way in terms of dress and style and manner and language. She gave terrific support to the feminists. People like Baleka was a strong feminist, Betty, very strong feminist, Nabibi, very strong feminist, Sandeli Mbeki organized the Conference of Women. Ruth gave Ivy, Otsebi Kataburi. They were committed, organized feminists, and he ensured that they had space they were listened to. And at the in-house seminar, where we developed the constitutional guidelines, Ruth Mompati made the most sensational presentation, very quietly and calmly, saying you speak about non-racism and 300 years of racial domination, and say nothing about sexism and a millennium of sexism, and very, very powerful. And then, and completely with the support of other time, knowing that the president gave his backing, and people like, certainly at the conceptual level, like Chris Hani and Joe Slover and others, would also give that backing, but maybe not as presently, as sharply as OR did. It grieved him that women members of the ANC felt uncomfortable inside the organization. It wasn't male.
We are all South African citizens of equal worth. We are not talking about black majority. We are talking about democratic majority in a country comprising one people, not whites and blacks as such, but simply the people of South Africa.
A recurring theme from many of OR's mentees, if I can call them proteges, and colleagues such as yourself, is this word that he was almost the ultimate democrat in his style of leadership. And I want to know practically, what did that look like, considering that he's dealing with an organization that is in exile, that has people in different parts of the world? How does he continuously seek consensus, build consensus?
And add to it, that has to do a lot of its work in secrecy. That's conducting a revolutionary type of struggle with an armed component that requires very strict discipline, secrecy, and so on. How do you maintain democracy in the organization? And he showed it is possible. So when it came to the Kabwe conference, there was a lot of discontent. Some of the leaders in the camps, great discontent, even to the point of mutinies, people dying. And one reason for having Kabwe was to elect the new leadership. And the people who were unpopular were pushing for a slate. And it wasn't just be a number of people who you should vote for. Many East European countries had slates. The Communist Party would put up a slate. And you could vote for or against the slate. And so you'd get 99.94 voting for the slate. People say, look how democratic it is. Many of us spoke about how ludicrous it is. that you can get 99.4 or something like that for meaningful elections. Anyway, he insisted no slaves. So that was a blow for them. A secret ballot. And then suddenly we're in shock because we don't know most of the people. They are traveling names. Some are in Angola in the army, others underground in South Africa, others are diplomats. We don't know who to vote for. So now people beg them to say, who would you support? He said, I don't want to, you must choose. In the end, he gave us a list of, I think it was 30, from which we had to choose 20. And a much longer list. And he said you can write in other names. And Ronnie Casuals wasn't on that list, but he chose whether he loved Ronnie. And Ronnie came in as number, just 30 we had to choose, as number 31. He just missed it from the right end because the MK people loved him very much, even though he wasn't on the list by Tambo. He often spoke about the ANC as the parliament of the people. By that he meant free speech inside you. Very, very important that everybody must say what they think, what they believe. I was told a story by a young person, now not so young, one of the very discontented people in one of the camps, very, very angry with the treatment they were getting. And he told me, I came to that camp, and another one of the very, very angry, even bitter MK person stood up when OR came to speak and said, what's this old, it was done in African language, which unfortunately I can't convey. I win, he was speaking something like that. You're sending this old man with his glasses and briefcase to come speak to us. What does he know about what's life like in the camp? And immediately security were ready to pounce on this guy. And Tambo stopped them. And at the end of the meeting, he said, I'm going to come back to this camp in 3 weeks' time. I just want to tell you that young man who spoke is very strong language. Nobody must touch him. Don't you dare touch him. Anybody who touches him and punishes him for saying what's on his mind will be in severe trouble from the leadership. That was an example of his willingness to listen, even when it was directed at him. We sent out documents in advance. Should whites be allowed into the top leadership of the ANC? All the branches of the ANC all over the world had to discuss that. We discussed it in advance, get mandate positions on that. And at NEC meetings, he would be the last one to listen to everything. He wouldn't lay down a line and then you support or oppose. It's often very difficult to lay down. He would speak and he would win people over by his logic, his persuasiveness, by his humanity, thoughtfulness, by his ability to draw on ANC history. This is a great student of ANC. He's learned history generally. He was also a tremendous international. He could fly to Moscow to speak to Gorbachev, then go to Stockholm to speak to Olof Palme before he was assassinated, then fly to Washington to speak to Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, George W. Shultz. Then he'd come back. I remember he would speak to Kenneth Kaunda, one-party state in Zambia, fly to the People's Republic of Mozambique and speak to Samora Machel, the president of Frelimo. Be driven up to Mbabane, where he would meet with King Sobhuza, fly to Maseru to meet the military council in charge. 5 different kinds of regime, but communicate with each one of them in a way to get support for our struggle in South Africa. But ultimately, as far as ANC was concerned, no military rule, no one-party state, no kingdom in the sense of a monarchy ruling the country, telling us also not to be too harsh with the traditional leaders who were collaborating with the regime, so then we drive them. We wanted to democratize the way they function. So he was, in that sense, a natural Democrat. And I even heard the phrase used when it came to meeting a number of writers at Victoria Falls from South Africa, mainly Afrikaans speaking. And a number of them were gay and lesbian, and they raised the question of sexual orientation. And Thabo Mbeki made simply a statement saying the ANC believes that relationships that consenting adults have is their business. There should be no discrimination. And I'm walking with Father Jordan afterwards, and he said, you know, I don't think Thabo had a mandate from the NEC, and who knows what the NEC might have said. He said, when it comes to OR, there's no problem. He's a natural Democrat. So the natural Democrat would not discriminate on grounds of sexuality. The natural Democrat would not go along with patriarchy, and certainly not with racism and all the other kinds of phobias that can deny people their. So he, in that sense, becomes the exemplar of democracy, of integrity.
There are any elements of his legacy you think are missing from South African society? So obviously the Constitution is there, and you've spoken of his DNA living there and very much the father of our Constitution. Are there any elements of his legacy you see absent from our society?
Well, not absent, but that have been diminished and to some extent suppressed. He lived for freedom. He lived for the people. He lived for beauty. He lived for creating a fair society. And that's all that mattered for him.
That Oliver Tambo makes to the struggle. Tell me what you think are your strengths.
My political strength, I think, lies in the truth. I am simply what I am. I don't try to be anything else.
You're described as a reluctant revolutionary. Is that just a cliche?
No, I think it is, because if being a revolutionary involves a fervent desire and determination to see radical change, I am that.
Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, teta no boda, kululu Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, teta no boda, kululu mande soboya, kululu mande sopata, kululu mande soboya, kululu mande sopata, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, teta no boda. Oliver Tambo, teta